right off.
It's a very nice collar. You look lovely. You look lovely, little one.
These collars are cutting edge. They house a mini hard drive that stores a wealth of data. And they also transmit a VHF signal that allows Mark to track the raccoons in the city and download the data as his study progresses.
Then I suggest Suzanne stays behind just to keep dogs and people away, and we go and find somebody else.
Little bit.
In total, 5 raccoons have been collared for this test study.
Let's have a look what you got here. It's a girl? No, it's a girl.
5 foot soldiers are set forth to give scientists a guided tour into their daily lives. And give us a window into a world that's long been hidden from view. The newly released mom quickly returns to her kits. At 3 weeks old, they're moving beyond the newborn stage as their eyes and ears open to the world for the first time. Raccoon mothers raise their kits alone, so they prefer natal dens high up in the trees, far from threats, including male raccoons who may prey on the young.
Any of the animals that spend time with their mom through their development are generally thought of as being smarter than other animals. Raccoons stay with their moms, sometimes throughout an entire year, so they do have that time to grow, and it's a time for their brain to develop as well.
Raccoons develop quickly and are able to adapt to a variety of different landscapes. Just off the coast of Nanaimo, British Columbia, lies Newcastle Island, a provincial park that's home to a unique community of sailors, campers, and raccoons.
Raccoons would have to be placed right up there as one of the most adaptable animals on the planet. That's why they're so successful at quickly adjusting to new and novel environments.
Raccoons have a habit of using their front feet in terms of foraging. In fact, they have a very strong sense of touch. Part of that is actually an adaptation for searching for food under muddy water.
It's a myth that raccoons always wash their food. Water softens dense nerve meshes in the calloused layer of skin on their front feet, making them up to 5 times more sensitive. So they act almost like taste buds, sending a rush of information to their brains, allowing them to see the world with their feet, freeing up their eyes to look for other things, like predators or more food.
Everyone knows that they use their front feet in ways that almost no other mammals do.
And it's not a common thing to have this kind of sense of touch in the animal kingdom. Outside of primates, it's hard to find any other examples.
The raccoons on this island demonstrate what scientists have long believed, that there's a strong link between an animal's ability to manipulate objects and its intelligence. The 14 campsites on the island come with lock boxes for provisions. And if campers fail to use them, the raccoons here will teach them to be smarter.
They're always looking for new challenges. If they think that there's a reward, and to a raccoon, there's always the possibility of a reward, they're going to continue trying to solve a problem, trying to overcome a certain challenge.
Back in Toronto, the kits are 6 weeks old and big enough to start exploring. They're like toddlers taking their first steps, but their first steps are 60 feet up in the air on a precarious surface. Their vigilant mom rarely lets her kits out of sight. Over the next year, there will hardly be a moment when she's not teaching, feeding, or protecting her young. And as every mother knows, this can be exhausting. All this play is training the kits for their biggest challenge yet. Their mom gathers them up to leave the security of their natal den and descend 60 feet head first into the darkness for their first touch on solid ground.
Well, it's such a peculiar thing. We never know what tomorrow brings, and I never knew love moves at such a frantic pace. Well, I'm head over heels for you. Feel like I've got the stomach flu. And if this is heaven, heaven is a scary place.
A new world is about to begin for these young raccoons. They'll now be weaned from mother's milk and begin daily lessons on how to find food on their own. So mother takes them closer to the city's abundant food supply. First, though, they need to find a safe place to rest and recover. Raccoons keep up to 20 den sites at any one time, hedging their bets in a world of risk. Propelled into an unfamiliar world, these kits have a lot to learn, and quickly. Their mother teaches by example, and this lesson is how to collapse your spine. As the city wakes up, the lesson becomes more urgent. So mother demonstrates again. After an hour, 2 kits clamber in. 3 stragglers remain outside. Finally, a third kit is successful. But after struggling for over 2 hours, exhaustion is setting in. With her last kit outside, Mum faces a hard decision. For a millennium, the temples of Japan have survived wars, weather, and the ravages of time. Now they're under siege by an enemy that is as adorable as it is destructive. The most prized temples are high in the mountains above Kyoto. Here, Buddhist monks pray, meditate, and match wits with raccoons on a daily basis.
This temple has been protected by our ancestors for over 750 years. In a matter of a year or just a few months, the destruction by raccoons is almost unthinkable.
Raccoons have damaged over 80% of the temples here, clawing and chewing out dens and rotting the structure with their feces and urine. The monks, at wit's end, have enlisted mammologist Miko Kawamichi to help them in their fight.
Right now, all over Japan are buildings, farms, fields, and even our native wild animals are all under attack by raccoons. The temples and shrines in Japan have been standing for over 1,000 years, and it's impossible to replicate those buildings. And now, raccoons are destroying them.
Raccoons are not indigenous to Japan, or anywhere even close to Japan. But that hasn't stopped them from leaving their mark all over the country.
Here, rascal!
In the 1970s, Nippon Animation created a cartoon called Rascal the Raccoon, based on a novel by Sterling North. The Japanese fell in love with Rascal and began to import baby raccoons as pets. At the peak of the cartoon's success, Japan was importing as many as 1,500 raccoons a year from North America.
After a year, the raccoons grow and they become violent to people, biting and scratching. The people grew tired of the raccoons and began to discard them. About the time, there was a cartoon on TV about a raccoon called Rascal. And at the end of the story, there was a scene where Rascal was released to the forest. And then people who were watching this thought, this is the right thing to do. The raccoon should go back to the forest.
Thousands of these raccoons were released into forests near temples and shrines.
Because raccoons originally lived in the woods in North America, maybe when they came to Japan and saw the buildings, they thought, oh, that's a big tree.
Of all native animals in Japan, no single species has caused such atrocious damage. So we definitely need a strategy to tackle the issue now. Otherwise, it's hopeless.
These masked aliens have no natural predators here. So the Japanese, including the monks, have adopted a zero-tolerance policy. Every year in Japan, over 10,000 raccoons are trapped, then killed.
It's impossible to get rid of all the raccoons in Japan now. My job is to kill as many raccoons as possible before the problem escalates further. Unfortunately, that's my mission.
In their quest to rid the ancient temples of raccoons, the Japanese are turning to modern German engineering. In the early 1930s, a pair of raccoons was imported to Germany and released in the countryside outside Berlin to amuse hunters. Not long after, 24 raccoons escaped from a local fur farm. And now, Germany, much to the chagrin of its European neighbors, is overrun with raccoons. The city of Kassel in central Germany is home to the largest raccoon population in Europe, with up to 100 raccoons per square kilometer.
What we tried to do here in Kassel at first was to intensively hunt the raccoons. We tried to push them out of the territory. Despite our great efforts, this didn't work. That's when we decided to take a scientific approach.
After studying the movements of Kassel's raccoons, scientists noticed that 70% of the time, a raccoon caused damage or got into a house by climbing up the downspout. Biologists Frank U. Michler and Berit Koneman are investigating raccoon behavior. Michler was part of the team that invented some simple devices to outwit Kassel's ring-tailed invaders.
You have to know how a raccoon climbs up on a drain pipe. He climbs up by grasping around it and crawling up. And if you mount this protection device on the drain pipe, he can't grasp around it any longer. He can't climb up further. And that's why it's over at this point.
Soon after the scientists' discovery, almost every house in Kassel put up some type of drain pipe protection.
And some are really effective, really good, and some are more good for raccoons to climb.
In time, Kassel's wily raccoons figured out how to climb over the best of these devices. That's when scientists turned to one of Germany's most famous hunters for help. Frank Becker began collaborating with scientists in 1996, and the result has been some of the most effective home protection devices to date.
In the last 10 to 15 years, the raccoons have adapted very fast to the urban space. And we are now dealing with the 8th or 10th generation of urban raccoons. And the first thing they learn is how to climb up the drain pipe.
Becker's years of experience as a hunter give him insight into how a raccoon moves through the urban landscape.
I have to see it through their eyes. I have to know what the raccoon can do. I have to think like a raccoon. A raccoon can of course climb up like this. And to prevent this, I mounted a blocking piece up there. And then he can't grasp behind here any longer. And I added a plexiglass plate, so the corner is now protected too. That's essentially my system. It's the same as a hunt. It's a power struggle to find out who's better. Every now and then I have a raccoon who is extremely challenging. And then the tug of war begins.
Back in Toronto, the 3-month-old kits from our study are beginning to explore the world on their own.
Life is such a mystery, but now it's all so clear to me. And the world has opened up for me now.
Animal play looks like it's just a lot of fun, but there are really important aspects that come out of play. It actually helps the animal learn how things work. They test out the physics of the world. They learn what to do and what not to do.
I can see it in my face. A new world has opened up for me now.
I think raccoons are smart enough that they would figure out our patterns, so they would understand that when the lights are out in the house, nobody throws anything at you. I think they may know as much as when garbage night is, so they go back on those nights.
Raccoons are highly opportunistic creatures with a keen sense of smell. Their noses can lead them to food, but obtaining it may require other talents.
They're attracted towards the smells. That's the instinct part of it. Trying to work out how to open these things is sort of difficult to discern how much of this is learning and how much of it is instinctive.
Raccoons can build on their knowledge. Once they figure out one garbage can, they can generalize to another garbage can that might be slightly different. And that makes them unbeatable.
The more obstacles you throw in their way, it becomes more challenging. So it's quite possible that by providing more and more obstacles, we are in fact selecting for smarter raccoons.
And they use more than their brains to wrestle with a problem.
They're basically built like a sumo wrestler. They have this really wide behind with a really low center of gravity, which would enable them to push over items that you wouldn't normally think that they'd be able to push over. In many cases, I'm sure much greater than what their body weight is. The raccoons that are learning how to solve some of these technical problems faster are probably the ones that are reproducing more and the ones that are going to be more likely to survive to the next generation.
Raccoon mothers pass their technical knowledge on to their young. Tonight's lesson, how to find a good meal close to home. At 4 months, the kids from our study have already learned that garbage bins can be a prime source for food. Unlike their country cousins, these youngsters may never recognize fish, unless it comes from a can. Given the chance, raccoons will eat almost anything. They're omnivores, and that pushes brain development. Because not only do they have to recognize a wide variety of food, they have to figure out how to access and eat it, too.
We think a similar thing may actually apply to humans, that trying to acquire different food items, the evolution of tools, all of these sorts of technical innovations that revolve around obtaining food have actually driven the evolution of the human brain. And a similar thing may have happened in raccoons.
But where you choose to find your food speaks to a whole different kind of smarts. Few other animals would dare poach the riches of zoo exhibits.
Raccoons are very curious, and I think most curious species are ones that can afford to be curious. So if you are a predator, or you're pretty high up on the food chain, you can afford to go and look at new things. If you are a prey item, like a bunny or something like that, you don't want to be too curious because you might be dinner. So I think raccoons are kind of high up there, and they can afford to be curious.
In some cases, their interest in taking advantage of a zoo might be considered intelligence. In other cases, it's foolishness, depending on which exhibit it is.
Cars are the #1 cause of death for urban raccoons. Raccoons learn traffic patterns and how to cross roads from their mother. The key lesson is to book it at a pace unseen in their normal travels. In order to safely navigate through cities, raccoons have developed their own secret highway system. Depuis des Ormeaux is trying to gather travel data from one of his female study raccoons who's showing her kits how to survive in the city. To download the data, his antenna needs an unobstructed signal from the raccoon's collar for at least 15 seconds. It's proving more difficult than he expected. At last, the mother stays in one spot and the signal connects.
Here we are.
In Chicago, raccoon expert Stan Garrett's research has debunked the myth that raccoons are solitary, showing that young males often travel together and females den together.
You can see there's pretty much a highway going through here.
But one thing Garrett has yet to gain a full picture of is the complex ways raccoons communicate with each other.
It's difficult to do because they're nocturnal and it's very hard to watch their behavior.
Garrett and his team have set up feeding stations equipped with night vision cameras and timed releases of cat food. He's striving to understand how information about food resources is communicated between raccoons and how these communal sites affect behavior.
Oh. Oh, he came back. Let's say you take a couple bags of dog food and you just dump it out. It's never been there before, right? There's been multiple studies, including ours, that have shown that within just 2 or 3 days, almost every raccoon in that neighborhood all know about that food source. And that's the big mystery about raccoons. If they were really as solitary as what everyone thinks they are, how would they all find these things so quickly? Oh, here we go. I don't think they would be able to see from where he's at right now. Oh yeah, he's tense. I would say those are not real close friends right there. Notice how they're facing toward each other. It's making its move. A nice interaction going on there too. Mm-hmm. They're clearly subordinate. As mysterious as the raccoon social system has been for us in terms of their relationships to each other, even more mysterious is how do they relate to other species. That's basically unknown at this point.
Garrett recently began the first research into how cats and raccoons interact around communal food resources.
The relationship between raccoons and cats is really fascinating because that's something that has not had a long evolutionary history.